my topic today is research ethics guidelines for the computer and information sciences. And I'm here drawing from an earlier project, the Satori project, which ran, I believe, 2013 to 2016. But I also will talk about some more recent developments as well. And this Satori was funded by Horizon 2020 funding. So if we look at the situation with ethics in computer science until recently, we see the following. First of all, that many different professional organizations or institutes or universities have codes of ethics for computer science. That is, they have professional codes for computer scientists. So the ACM, for example, has a code of ethics and professional conduct, which was most recently updated in 2018. The IEEE has a code of ethics, which was last updated, I believe, in 2020. And then various other computer ethics societies specialized in specific areas, say software engineering or AI, of course, robotics, other areas. They have their own specialized professional ethical codes. So what's noteworthy about codes of ethics is that they aim to guide and regulate professional conduct, the individual professional conduct of computer scientists. So they regulate their behavior, whether it's behavior in the context of research or in the context of interacting with clients or being a spokesperson for their field or different roles that they may have. So it's not specifically oriented towards research and innovation, these professional ethical codes, although they cover research and innovation, and they only pertain to individual professional conduct, which is different from a more general ethical guideline or set of guidelines for research. So there is a distinction to be made then between professional codes of ethics, right, and research ethics guidelines. And what is noteworthy about computer science is that until quite recently, there were no research ethics guidelines. There maybe were some attempts towards such guidelines, but we have not observed prior to 2017 any published research ethics guidelines supported by any major organization or professional association in computer science. Also, until about 2015, there were very few research ethics committees specifically for computer science. We've seen, at least in Europe, very few instances of such research ethics committees. So the conclusion here is that until recently, in computer science, there has been a fair amount of attention to professional ethical codes regulating professional conduct, but very little effort in research ethics. So this is actually something we wanted to change. That is, we who did the Satori project, which was a, as I said, a Horizon 2020 funded project on research ethics very broadly. And a specific objective of this project was to move beyond medical research ethics, to also have research ethics standards for fields other than medicine. And one of the fields that we covered in this project was computer science. In Satori, we developed a more general standard for research ethics, which was co-developed with CEN, the European Standards Committee. And this was done in the context of a CWA, which is kind of the simplest standard that you can develop. It's a working agreement in the context of which we developed a standards document. And the standards document was called Ethics Assessment for Research Innovation. And then part one, it had two parts. Part one specifically covered ethics committees and research ethics. And in it, we had procedural standards for research ethics committees more generally, as well as research ethics guidelines for various fields, including ethics guidelines for the computer and information sciences. So let me tell you more about what we did with the computer and information sciences. First, as a bit of context, in Observatory, we observed that several ethical principles for research ethics and ethical research apply to all fields of research and innovation. And those are the following 7. Research integrity or scientific integrity, which is probably more an individual quality than something that research ethics committees specifically screen for, although they may do that as well. But often it's separate from what ethics committees do. Then we have social responsibility, protection of human research participants. That's something you have in medicine, but also in psychology, and also in, for example, in computer science, there can be human research participants, protection of animals used in research, protection and management of data, and ethical dissemination of research results, the protection of researchers and the research environment, and the avoidance of and openness about potential conflicts of interest. So these are some ethical principles that we believe apply to all fields of research and innovation and should be part and parcel of any set of research ethics guidelines for a specific field. In addition to that, though, we believe that there should be field-specific ethics guidelines that are specific for medicine or specific for the social sciences or specific for computer science. So, and this need to have specific ethical principles and guidelines is because there are differences in the ethical issues and required ethical principles between scientific fields. And we looked at 6 kind of fields or areas, larger areas of science. And we observed that there are real differences in the ethical issues and required principles between them. So the medical sciences has long been a standard for research ethics, the biggest focus of research ethics, with a big focus on things like autonomy, informed consent, beneficence, non-malfeasance, justice, and human dignity. But these are ethical principles that are central to the relationship between medical researchers and human subjects, right? So the overriding concern in medical research ethics is with human subjects and whether they are treated in the right way. That is different already in the life sciences, where the relationship of researchers to living biological systems, ecosystems, and the environment is central. So there you have a partially different ethical principles that are important. Animal welfare then becomes important, ecosystems integrity and sustainability, health and environmental risks, the naturalness of innovation processes, and the idea of whether or not people are playing God and what is allowed in how we can tinker with nature. So the ethical issues are partially different and the ethical principles are partially different. In the natural sciences, the focus is on truth and accuracy, less of a concerned with impact. But so what is quite central in the natural sciences is our scientific integrity, data integrity, freedom from bias, honesty. Then moving to the engineering sciences, the focus is on technological interventions into society. So you get ethical principles like social responsibility, well-being, impacts on rights, precautionary principle, and sustainability. In the social sciences, the focus is on the relation between the researchers and human beings, as well as on social structures. So there you get principles like informed consent, equality, confidentiality, non-discrimination, human rights, avoidance of cultural and social bias, and respect. Humanities, I'll briefly move over that. The focus is on the study of human culture and human condition. So there again, different ethical principles. And finally, the computer and information sciences, the focus is on the processing, storage, and dissemination of information. So we get ethical principles that specifically pertain to those processes. So you get ethical principles pertaining to information privacy, information security, intellectual property, censorship and freedom of information, and specific issues having to do with fairness and non-discrimination in the processing of personal information and regulation of access to information systems. So these ethical principles come in addition to the ethical principles that regulate the kind of general issues in research ethics that we already referred to earlier. So that means that for research ethics guidelines for computer science, what we have developed is, first of all, 7 sets of general guidelines, the kind of ethics guidelines that pertain to any kind of research, like principles of informed consent and other guidelines for the protection of human participants, various principles for social responsibility in research, avoidance of conflict of interest, etc. So those are not really specific to computer science, but they can, of course, be further elaborated to be made more specific for particular research and innovation practices in computer science. Next to that, we have developed 9 sets of specific guidelines that deal with ethical principles and issues that we think are largely or wholly specific to computer science. So what I will next do is go into those 9 sets of ethics guidelines specifically for computer science. And for reasons of length, some of them I will summarize, some of them I will state at length. So we start with privacy and personal data and their protection. So here we already proposed general ethical guidelines for all research fields for the use of personal information in research, right? So whether you are a computer scientist or a social scientist or somebody working in medicine, you may end up using personal information in research. And that then, of course, should be regulated by ethical guidelines. And those we have kind of stated, informed consent, of course, and not collecting more personal information than you need, et cetera, et cetera. But then in addition, we have also proposed ethical guidelines pertaining to privacy, specifically for computer science research, like guidelines for the preparation of data, for data mining, for the development of techniques for surveillance and human subject monitoring, right? Because there are additional practices in computer science that have privacy implications that go beyond the mere collection and use of personal information in research. So next, also quite specific to computer science, the avoidance of information security risks. Here we have developed 6 guidelines. I'll give you a selection of 3. So one guideline is that researchers should ensure that new research concepts and innovations offer reasonable protection against any potential unauthorized disclosure, manipulation, or deletion of information, and against potential denial of service attacks, such as protection against hacking, cracking, cyber vandalism, software piracy, etc. Right. So here we're just kind of developing certain ethical safety standards that computer scientists should build into their innovations. Secondly, computer scientists should not engage in research that involves attempts to make unauthorized access to telephone systems, computer networks, databases, or other ICTs, as such research is illegal and unethical. And they should treat with extreme caution the dissemination of research involving the identification of undiscovered security weaknesses in existing systems, right? So there's clearly some ethical issues pertaining to information security that are quite specific to computer science. Then we have some principles of respect for freedom of expression in the context of computer science. 2 principles here. Computer scientists should ensure that new research concepts and innovations do not pose unjustified inherent risks to the freedom of individuals to express themselves through the publication and dissemination of information, or to their freedom of access to information. And if research or innovation involves the use of censorship methods, there should be an appropriate balance between the need of content control and the right of individuals to express themselves freely. Of course, you can go into more detail what that means in practice, but we are keeping the principles quite general here, and such elaborations can then be made, or there can be a reference to documents where they are made. So 4th, respect for intellectual property. One should ensure that new research concepts and innovations do not pose unjustified inherent risks to the intellectual property rights of individuals or organizations. And one should avoid research that could generate copyright issues, such as research involving peer-to-peer networking or file sharing and distribution. Then 5th, there are other individual rights and liberties that we here group together. Mainly they have to do with control, transparency, and responsibility. So one principle is about ensuring that new research concepts and innovations do not pose inherent risks to autonomy, authenticity, or identity of individuals, and do not take control away from their users. And that can be further fleshed out. I'm just summarizing it here very briefly. Another principle is to ensure that decisions made by information systems, and this especially pertains to AI systems, of course, that these take into account the rights, values, and interests of stakeholders, and that they should be transparent and hence accountable. And 3rd, one should take into account how responsibilities and liabilities are assigned between humans and machines when information systems are involved in decision making. So then we have a category about harms to justice and to equality. So systems that are fair and in promoting equality and non-discrimination. So here we have 3 principles that it should be considered how new research concept innovations could widen or narrow social inequalities, how they could harbor or counter unjust bias, with specific named social biases like age, gender, and sexual orientation, and to consider how new research concept innovations could harm or promote the interests of vulnerable or underrepresented groups. Then we have a few more. Promotion of well-being and the common good. That is, it should be considered how research or innovation activity could harm or promote the general well-being of individuals and groups. Also, how they could harm or promote social skills and behavior of individuals and the development of their virtues, and promoting important social institutions and structures and democracy and important aspects of cultural diversity. Then we have the promotion of our environmental sustainability, taking that into account in both the development of software and hardware and network solutions. And finally, we have issues of dual use. That is, it should be considered whether new research and concept innovations could have military applications or could contribute to the proliferation of weapons of mass destructions. And one should consult proper authorities before publishing and adhere to relevant national and supranational regulations if a technology has significant military applications, or if it contributes significantly to the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And then even if publication is allowed, find a proper balance between security and freedom of publication. There are, of course, quite strict national and European guidelines on dual-use research that must be adhered to. So that concludes an overview of the ethics guidelines we developed in Satori and in the SEN standard for research ethics that we developed. What I now want to go into is how these ethics guidelines relate to more recent ethics guidelines for AI. So we actually published these guidelines in 2017, the kind of general computer ethics guidelines, which was well before various AI ethics guidelines were published. Most of those were published in 2019 and 2020. Of course, we have the high-level expert group on AI that studied ethics guidelines for trustworthy artificial intelligence, you may have heard of, and will also feature later on today in the presentations. The IEEE published similar ethics guidelines called Ethically Aligned Design. Then the OECD also published its OECD Principles on AI, and UNESCO did a recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence. The ethics principles are quite similar in these 4 sets of guidelines for AI, but what they certainly have all in common is that they're all specifically aimed at artificial intelligence and not other fields of computer science. If we look at the EU guidelines, there are 7 requirements: human agency and oversight, technical robustness, safety, privacy, data governance, transparency, diversity, non-discrimination and fairness, environmental and societal well-being, and accountability. And those are then specifically geared towards research in AI, or more broadly also including AI-powered big data and robotics, but certainly not intended for computer science and information technology more generally. However, what one nowadays sees sometimes are attempts to also apply these ethics guidelines to information technology in general. And my question that I want to answer here is that a good idea? Or do we need ethics guidelines for computer science more generally that are different from the AI guidelines? Well, if you look at the Satori SEN computer ethics guidelines and the AI guidelines as developed by the EU expert group, as well as others, because they have very similar principles. First of all, you see a significant overlap in the kinds of principles and guidelines that are presented. Certainly at the highest level of generality, you see similar issues. That is, in our Satori Sen guidelines, there's also a lot of reference to privacy, to safety security, to also some to this problem of agency and control. There's reference to transparency. We have reference certainly a lot to diversity and fairness considerations. Environmental societal well-being is in there, and accountability is there and as well. So at the top level, at least, at the most general level of description of these principles, we have similar principles already in the computer science ethics guidelines. However, the difference is simply that twofold. The computer ethics guidelines are broader, they're more complete, they're more encompassing for research ethics purposes. And on the other hand, the AI guidelines are focused on AI-specific issues, such as control that can be taken away by machines who have their own intelligence, issues of transparency and explainability that specifically pertain to the reasoning and decision-making processes of intelligent machines, the idea of delegating intelligent tasks to machines, as well as responsibility and accountability for decision-making, for intelligent decision-making. So the AI guidelines are both narrower and more specifically about AI. So in that sense, we don't believe that they are an adequate replacement or that they should be generalized as they stand now for as research ethics guidelines for computer science as a whole. So what we recommend instead is, first of all, the computer science ethics guidelines that we developed in Satori and in Sen in 2017 are, in our opinion, still current. The AI ethics guidelines then should not be used for computer science as a whole, but the AI ethics guidelines can certainly be used as standalone guidelines specifically for the field of AI. They may also be incorporated into broader computer ethics guidelines as guidelines that specifically pertain to AI applications within computer science. So that concludes my presentation. I refer you to the Satori project website, which is still running, where you can download all the deliverables, including the one I referred to here, which is deliverable D4.7, and also recently published an article on this, a chapter in the Code of Ethics and Ethical Guidelines book that just came out. Thank you very much.